This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Cornell Studio Supply, located in the gem city of Dayton, Ohio. Find all your pottery and ceramic sculpture equipment and supplies with the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us January 16th through the 18th, 2026 for a colored clay and material inclusion workshop with Chris Alvashir and Jillian Park. Visit CornellStudioSupply.com to sign up. Cornell Studio Supply, owned and operated for potters by potters.
This episode is sponsored by Monkey Stuff. Monkey Stuff makes things for makers. We're inspired every day by the craft and creativity of makers and design and manufacture tools and accessories to try to make your making life a bit more delightful. Our products are designed in California, by makers and for makers, and manufactured in the USA. Check out our line of pottery accessories and tools at monkeystuff.com. Follow us on Instagram to see what we're up to in our studios, and keep on making great things.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 555 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. This week we start a special two-part interview with renowned artist and educator David MacDonald. MacDonald is a professor emeritus of ceramics at Syracuse University, where he taught from 1971 to 2008. His large functional vessels are carved with intricate patterns that highlight and celebrate African heritage and aesthetics. In this part of our interview, David talks about discovering ceramics at Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University, in the 1960s, and his early career art that reflected the social change of the civil rights movement. If you'd like to find out more and see examples of his work, you can go to davidmacdonaldpottery.com. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Actually, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was your early life being a track athlete. Because when you first went to Hampton, which it's Hampton University, but it was Hampton Institute.
At that time. Yeah.
And you went on a track scholarship. So
Yes.
Can you talk about your track experience and then how that led into going to school there?
Well, I mean, I was always athletic as I was growing up, playing baseball mostly. Little League baseball and sandlot baseball. So when I went to high school, I'm the third oldest, and my other two brothers played football, and so I was expected to play football, and I tried one season of football, and I don't like running into people, and I don't like people running into me, and so I went out for track instead, and since I was an African American, everybody thought that, like my older brother, I would be a sprinter. And I tried sprinting, and I kept coming in last, So the coach started training me to do longer races. I tried the quarter mile, I tried the half mile, and I found the mile to be just right for me. I mean, it was a race that took a lot longer to run, and it required a lot of discipline. But the kind of training that I enjoyed, and I think in some ways the fact that I was a long distance runner also prepared me for the ceramic process, But at any rate, I ran the mile and 2 mile in high school, and I was able to get an athletic scholarship to Hampton, and I ran the mile there. You know, that the kind of training that a long distance runner has to be involved in. And there's a lot of time you spend alone, in the morning, putting in the mileage to build up your stamina. And so I would get up and probably around 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning and run maybe about 5 miles or so just to build up my stamina. And so one of the things I realized in retrospect, that making pottery is about the same thing, and also it's the idea that one of the things I realized being a long distance runner is, in order to get good results, you got to put the time in. And the same thing is true about pottery, most certainly, and ceramics, but I think it's also true about art. You got to put the time in order to get good results. And so being a long distance runner kind of prepared me for the kind of process that's necessary to achieve a success in ceramics. And so when I went to Hampton, I went to Hampton and enrolled in the fine arts program. I wanted to be a painter. And the second semester of my freshman year, I spoke with my academic advisor, and she said, if you're really interested in making a living from making art, the best way to do that is to teach art, and that way you'll get a steady paycheck, but also you'll have the opportunity to make your own work during your spare time. And so I switched from the fine arts curriculum to the art education curriculum, and because I did that, I had to take a ceramics class. And so I took the first semester of ceramics, and the first assignment was to make a mug, and so using the coil method. And so I made this mug, and a couple of weeks or so later, after the mug had been bisque fired and glazed, I knew that Mr. Gilliard was firing a kiln that weekend, and so it was a Monday, and so I figured he'd be in the studio unloading the kiln. Well, I had a class. I had educational psychology that morning. So I was on my way to the educational psychology class when I realized that I'd have to pass by the building that the ceramic shop was in. So I figured I'd just walk through the shop, see if Mr. Gilliard was unloading the kiln, and if my piece had been fired. And so he saw me and he pointed out my mug. I used green was my favorite color, and so I picked the chrome green lead glaze for my mug, which in retrospect was suicidal. But at any rate, I didn't know that. I liked green, and so they had this cup that was this Dear John green, Dear John tractor green. And so Mr. Gilliard said, "That's a really nice cup you've got there, Mr. MacDonald, and you'll be able to use that in the dorm when you're up late at night, cramming for exams. You can make yourself coffee or tea in that cup, And I had grown up in public housing, and so it wasn't the kind of situation where people made things. My father didn't have, a workshop in the basement or in the garage or anything like that. There weren't any tools around. And so I found that I was somewhat skeptical about the notion that having made this cup out of this shapeless mass of dirt, that it would actually be usable and practical. So I didn't want to go to educational psychology anyway, so I used the excuse of testing Mr. Gilliard's hypothesis by going back to the dorm and making myself a cup of instant coffee and putting my feet up on my desk and enjoying the fact that I was kept looking at this cup and thinking this started out as just a lump of dirt, and now it's something that I can use. And I wanted to have that feeling again. It's just the notion of being able to make something from nothing, because that hadn't been part of my experience growing up. So that's when I decided that ceramics was going to be my primary academic interest. And painting kind of fell to the wayside. And I think part of it was because painting to me tended to be more intellectual than physical, whereas ceramics was both intellectual and physical. But I liked the physical nature of it because I was an athlete. And so the fact that I was working with this material that required a certain amount of strength, but also a certain amount of discipline and control, and a material that occasionally would fight back, when you're trying to center that lump of clay. And so I had this natural affinity, I felt, for clay, and so I became more and more interested in ceramics. Now, one of the things that, in retrospect, I realized was that on historically black colleges at that time, culturally, it was important appearances were very important in terms of having the latest fashions. The co-eds would spend, I don't know how many countless hours making themselves up, hairdos, makeup and all that stuff, manicures, looking good was very important. All right. And some of the people, or some of the students who were at Hampton, I didn't realize it at that time, but Hampton was considered one of the more prestigious historically black colleges because it wasn't a state school. It was a private college. And so a number of the students that were enrolled there came from fairly affluent black families. They were fairly well-to-do. And so this whole notion of looking good, didn't mesh very well with ceramics, which was a process that required that you get really dirty. And so because of that, I think that there weren't a lot of students that were interested in doing more than the minimum in ceramics at the time. And so you had this professor, Joseph Gilliard, who was incredibly knowledgeable about the technical side of ceramics, but he had no one to share that information with. And so when I demonstrated that I was interested in more than just taking the one or two introductory classes, that I really wanted to become immersed in ceramics, it became an opportunity for him to share his knowledge and his passion for this particular material and process with a younger person. And so Mr. Gillian and I would spend, many hours. He'd be in his office doing some paperwork or something, and I'd wander into the studio and check on what I was working on, and I'd see him in his office, and we sit and talk for a while there. one of the policies was that the studio was closed on Saturday and Sunday. So in the weekend, you couldn't work in the studio. But some of the more ambitious students had figured out that if they left the window of the men's room unlocked, we could sneak in, you know. And there was one Sunday when I was in the studio working, and Mr. Gilliard came in to get something out of his office, and he saw me working, and I said, "Oh, gee whiz, I'm going to be in trouble now." And he didn't say any. He said hello, and he went to his office, got something, and was on his way out the door, and he said, "Oh, by the way, Mr. MacDonald, make sure you lock that window." You know, and so Mr. Gilliard was an incredibly generous person. I mean, I was so taken. Well, I was taken by the fact I grew up in northern New Jersey, so I grew up in integrated school systems, elementary school, junior high school, and high school, and so a lot of the teachers that I had were white, you know, and so that became my notion of those people that were knowledgeable and skillful and had information. They were usually white people, you know. I mean, I had an occasional African American teacher in the public schools, but they were kind of a rarity. And coming to a campus where everybody was black, from the janitors all the way up to the president, all the people in the business office, all the people in the health center, all the people mowing the lawns and trimming the shrubs, everybody, everywhere I turned, it was a task being done by an African American. Was quite an enlightening experience for me, coming from a northern environment. So, you know, the fact that this man, Mr. Joseph Gilliard, was as knowledgeable about this field. I used to joke that he's probably forgotten more about ceramics than I actually know. You know, that I was just amazed. I was so taken by him that my wife and I got married when we were both seniors at Hampton, and we had our first child during the second semester of our senior year. And I so admired Mr. Gilliard that I named my first son after him. You know, and my wife was in complete agreement, because one of the things when we were dating, she always knew where to find me. You know, and she would come into the ceramics shop and sit on a stool and watch me throw on the potter's wheel. Many evenings or afternoons. But at any rate, my experience at Hampton made me realize that there were African Americans that were accomplished in many different fields, and that there was a lot of information to be gained. And I think one of the things that I think was part of the Hampton experience was the fact that everybody, the people in the business office, the people in the central administration, the campus was small enough, although it was probably a couple of thousand students, but the campus was small enough that people knew who you were. And when one of the things that I remember is that in the main building where the administration offices were, they would post all of those people who got a 4.0 grade point average for that semester. And I was one of them that was able to achieve that one semester. And I was amazed at how many people knew that and how many people actually walking across campus would congratulate me on that. So there was this whole sense of we're family, we're community, we look out for each other, which I don't know if that's still the case at Hampton, because it has grown significantly. And unfortunately, it has essentially eliminated its art program. But that was one of the things about being on a historically black college, that you felt everybody had your back, and that, but also if you were doing something you weren't supposed to be doing, someone would know, either call you out or let those people that should know, that this young man needs to be talked to. Yeah. So that was my experience at Hampton. I tried, in my own educational experience, I tried to have that kind of relationship with the ceramic majors, or the people that took my introductory classes, because I felt that I wanted them to know that although at times I may seem gruff, I do want them to succeed, and I will do whatever I think is appropriate for them to have that success, And so that's one of the things I hope I carried over from Hampton into my teaching practice.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. When you were at Hampton, I think it was 62 to 67?
63 to 68.
Okay. Which during that time there were assassinations, there was a lot of social turmoil. What was it like to be on an HBCU campus at that time as a young budding artist?
Well, being on a historically black campus at that time was really quite intense. The actual civil rights movement had started probably a decade and a half prior to that, and I guess if we try to figure out when it started coalescing into an actual political and social movement, probably a lot of it was a result of a lot of veterans coming back from the Second World War. And they had been in Europe fighting and dying to keep democracy safe, but yet they come back to this country, and many of the veterans, especially the ones, some of them in the South, who were being harassed and being beaten up and lynched. Many of them were wearing the uniform of the U.S. Army, and so there was a realization of that. We had fought, at least two wars: the Civil War and then the Second World War, and there were also black troops in the First World War. We had fought all these wars to keep democracy safe, but we haven't been the beneficiaries of those efforts. And so they started realizing it was time that we got what we deserved and what we fought for. And so the early 50s, the early 60s, the 50s was when it really started to coalesce, and kind of reached a fever pitch during the 60s. And in my freshman year, in my freshman year, John F. Kennedy was assassinated, in 1963. And then in my senior year, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was also assassinated, and those were very stark events that kind of made a lot of people aware of the fact that, this struggle is against a force that is relentless and also not adverse to the use of violence to achieve what they feel is right. And I remember doing a series of pieces about violence, one of which was a piece called Violence is as American as Mom's Apple Pie. And it was in reaction to a instance in which the Black Panthers had said that they were willing to defend their communities, which meant that they were willing to defend their neighborhoods against the government forces, police, and whatever, even if it resorted to violence. And some senator or congressman got up in Washington and made a speech and said that he was against and abhorred the idea that these people, meaning Black people, were willing to use violence to achieve what they felt was their rights, and I think it was Stokely Carmichael who subsequently made a speech, and in the speech he said it's ironic that this congressman would make a speech against violence when, in essence, violence is as much a part of the American fabric as Mom's apple pie. And when you think about the history of America, it is a history of violence, of Europeans, taking what they want violently. And one of the points that I sometimes make is that, unfortunately, that culture of violence because one of the things that who was Malcolm X said when JFK was assassinated, he said, it's just a matter of the chickens coming home to roost. And he got a lot of flack as a result of that. But basically, he was saying, this is just a result of the history of violence that America was built on. And so, contemporarily, we are reaping the results of that culture of violence with all of these mass shootings, our children being killed in schools and at social events, and it's because of the fact that the violence is as American as Mom's apple pie, and whether or not we'll ever be able to get past that I don't think it will happen in my lifetime. I don't think we'll reach a point where people won't be able to buy assault weapons. And I don't know a lot about weaponry. I don't know about guns and all that stuff. But I've been told that assault weapons are specifically designed to kill people. They're not designed for hunting. They're not designed for sportsmanship. They're designed for war. And the fact that the civilians are allowed to own them, is one of the things that we need to come to grips with. But I forget what the question was.
Well, we were talking about what it was like to be on the campus of HBCUs in that latter part of the civil rights era. What I'm interested in is how, when you were making the work that was image-based and that addressed politics directly, I would imagine, and I think I've even heard you say this, that like making work was cathartic, but also you were coming from a place of anger, of inner rebellion against the societal norm. Mm-hmm. And that took a toll on you. Like there was a payment you had to make emotionally to be able to make that art. Yeah. At some point that shifted and you started making work from a different place.
Yeah, I starting probably in my junior year in undergraduate school, all the way up through graduate school, and probably the first 10 years or maybe 8 years of being on the faculty at SU, my work was based on the idea of me getting pissed off about something and using that as the engine to drive my creative work. And at some point, I had reached a point where I wanted to make a change. I guess the epiphany, so to speak, came when I was having a one-person show at this community gallery that was an extension of the African American Studies program at Syracuse. They had the African American Studies program at Syracuse had wanted to have programs that were community based, and one of which was this art center called the Community Folk Arts Center at that time, and now it's called the Community Folk Art Gallery. No, it was called the Community Folk Art Gallery at that time. Now it's called the Community Folk Art Center. But they hired a gentleman by the name of Herb Williams to teach on campus art classes or art history classes that were Afrocentric or African American inspired. One of the courses that he taught was the art of the Black world, but also to open up a gallery in the community where they would have exhibitions of work of people from underrepresented populations. And I think it was sometime around 1975 or 76, I was given an opportunity to have a one-person show there. And it was, I had maybe about 20 pieces in the show, all of them some aspect of a manifestation of my anger and frustration in terms of the predicament or position of the African American in this culture. And so it was the usual kind of exhibition opening, more of a social event than anything else. And I was standing around absorbing compliments left and right. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye, there was this elderly white woman that seemed to want to talk to me or ask me a question or compliment me, but she would, I guess, get up, see an opportunity and start to approach me, but then someone else would engage me in a conversation. Well, towards the end of the reception, when the crowd was thinning out and people were getting ready to leave, she saw an opportunity to approach me. And she complimented me on my work, the skill that was exhibited in terms of making the work and all of those things. But then she wanted to know if she could ask me one question. Man, I figured there was a question, who do I make the check out to? Well, the question she asked me was a question that I had sat through probably 100 hours of critique in my education. And it was a question that was so insightful and so important to me at that time that I don't recall what my reaction to it was. But she wanted to know was there anything positive about being a black in America, or was life just one frustration and humiliation after another? And I don't recall what my response to the question was, because it was a question I hadn't been asked and something I hadn't thought about, you know. But the question bugged me for months after that point. And one of the things, I came to the realization that my work was driven by me trying to find something to be pissed off about, and then that becoming the impetus to move my work and to create a certain ceramic objects. And so I started thinking, like, this is not what art is supposed to be about. I mean, art has a responsibility. Artists have the responsibility of being socially responsible. But I'm looking for things to be pissed off about. I'm looking for ways of expressing my victimization, when I should be looking for things that are positive about being an African American. And I knew that these things existed. But at that particular time, it was, I guess, in vogue for black artists to be pissed off, angry, in your face. And I was just following that trend. And so I started thinking about conversations that I had with my professor in graduate school, Robert Stull, and how he had many years prior to then his work has started transitioning into being inspired by African culture. And so that's what I started thinking about, and I started investigating African culture. Now, some people would think, well, you claim to be African American, but you don't know anything about Africa. Well, I mean, I claim to be African American, but I went through a school system that was designed to perpetuate Western cultural ideas. And so I was culturally, or I should say educationally, I was as white as the Jewish and the Polish and the Italian and the Albanian guys I hung out with. And so, the only difference between me and them was the fact that I didn't know where I came from. I didn't know what part of Africa my people came from. I didn't know what ethnic group my people belonged to, whereas all of my other friends knew that, and they rejected it. They didn't want to speak Italian. They didn't want to speak Polish. They didn't want to speak Albanian. They wanted to speak English. And so I started trying to learn more about Africa. And I think the pivotal information that I got was from a catalog from an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum that was curated by William Fagg, who was an internationally renowned African art historian. And it was an exhibition of Nigerian ceramics. And so my wife was able to get a copy of that catalog because someone else on campus had ordered it. She was the head of interlibrary loan. And so when it came across her desk and the individual that ordered it was finished with it, she showed it to me, and I Xeroxed the entire catalog, which was probably over 300 pages, And I was just amazed at the diversity of ceramics just in Nigeria. And I was just amazed at the way that they were decorating surfaces. And so one of the realizations I came to was that I too was decorating surfaces, but I was decorating them with images of frustration and anger and victimization. You know, and so I decided that I wanted my work to be more about my African heritage than about the victimization that African Americans have experienced. That wasn't a decision based on the idea that we have arrived and that none of the issues that drove my work early on were no longer relevant. I still believe that that's the case in current social and political situations proves that to be true. But I just felt that I needed to use my voice to celebrate my African heritage and to share it with those people that may or may not be aware of it. So that's when my work changed from being political and social, although, occasionally I do a series of pieces based upon certain historical aspects of African American history. Like I did a series of about 6 or 7 pieces that were related to the transatlantic slave trade. And that I've always had a kind of ambivalent relationship to, because we were brought here, and all of the friends that I had in high school, they were there because their ancestors decided to come to America to have a better life. But my ancestors came to America in chains, and the life that they experienced here was not better than the life they had in Africa. And so the transatlantic slave trade was an incredibly inhumane and vicious activity, but like most things in life, it's not. As you grow older, you realize that life is not black and white. That life is more gray than anything else. And one of the things that I came to realize is that if there hadn't been a transatlantic slave trade, there would be no David MacDonald, and there would be no David MacDonald making this work that hopefully has some importance artistically and culturally, And so the series of pieces that I did related to the transatlantic slave trade, which is called the Middle Passage series, was both a recognition of the inhumanity of it, but also a recognition of the fact that this group of people were able to survive the cruelty, the barbarity, the brutal nature of the transatlantic slave trade, and also slavery in this country, and thrive as a result of it. And American culture, there are some people that would argue this, but American culture would be completely different if there hadn't been a transatlantic slave trade, if there weren't African Americans here. Things that people take for granted as part of being an American kind of thing, were initially part of the efforts of African American slaves or African slaves to hold on to what remnants of their former culture that they could, with the inhumane efforts of the slave holders to strip them of that heritage, to make them easier to control and and more subservient. But somehow, many of those traits and characteristics survived and have been incredibly influential in terms of the development of the American culture.
I'd like to thank David for coming on the show, and I encourage you to listen to the second part of this interview, which is coming up next week. There, we're going to talk about how he found an entry into African aesthetics, as well as the formal aspects of the repeating patterns that he uses. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's Monkey Stuff, the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, and Cornell Studio Supply. If you or your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor, you can get in touch at talesoftheredclayrambler.com. I'll be back next week with another interview. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.